Hello and welcome to Down to Earth with Terry Virts, where we talk about what matters down here on planet Earth. And if you enjoy the podcast, please subscribe and leave us ratings wherever you are listening to this. And today I'm super excited. I've got an awesome guest, Katherine Gehl. Katherine Gehl is a business leader turned author and political innovator. And I had a chance to meet her a couple of years ago at a talk she was giving at Harvard Business School. So Katherine, I've got my HBS shirt on today in honor of that.
Love to see it.
And you are talking about what I think is some of the most important issues in the world. I hate to be melodramatic about it, but when you look at what's happening on Earth, in America that is so divided, we just had a coup attempt in America. You know, when you wrap your brain around this, what's going on with democracy, I think it is absolutely one of the top problems in the world. And I'm sure you would agree with that, I would think.
Yes, I do. I actually think that so many of the things that fill our news, fill our newspapers, fill our screens, can be traced back to, as a source of the problem or as a requirement for the solution, our political system and how well it enables us to solve the problems, or how well it, in effect, forces us to not address our problems. But, and I want to talk about that, but I just have to say one personal thing. First of all, it's great to see you again. Second, when you are talking about, what did you just say? You know, when I, Terry, look at what's happening on Earth, this seems to be the most important. And I just want to say it's sort of cool that you actually have been someone who has looked at Earth in a way that most of us never have. And I like that. It's really great to be with you. It's inspiring.
Thanks for that. Actually, I see in your background, I like that book you've got back there, View from Above.
That's right. So that is you looking at Earth, who, for those who are watching or listening to Terry's podcast, have not seen his spectacular photography in his astronaut days, should look at that as well, because it's gorgeous. And I'm not signing up to be a space tourist anytime soon, but I do wish I could have that experience you had, and it must give you a perspective. I will ask you that. Does it sometimes, when you're thinking about our life on Earth and these problems we have, and as tragic as they are, nonetheless, we're small in this cosmic world. Do you ever calibrate your thinking based on your time in space?
I do, actually. I remember one night we were having dinner on the Russian segment. The Russians have this big hatch that you can look out on the floor at Earth. And I looked over and I was like, you know what, guys, there's 6 of us up here in space, and there's over 6 billion people down there. We're literally 1 in a billion. I mean, we're really lucky. It was the point I was trying to make, you know, how fortunate we are. We're 1 in a billion to get this view. And I can remember looking out, and when you see the Earth, it's like, it is gorgeous, it's spectacular, and it's been around for billions of years, and it's going to be around for billions of years, which puts the problems we have in perspective. You know, things are probably not as bad as you think, or that, you know, things will be okay in the long run. But the things that concern me are how we deal with each other. One night I was sitting there with the Russian colleagues looking out of that same hatch on the Russian segment. It was in the winter of 2015, and there was a war going on in Ukraine. Of course, all my Russian cosmonauts have cousins and family. Everybody in Russia knows somebody in Ukraine. And as we flew over, we could see red flashes. We could see bombs going off in Ukraine. So it was so profound to be with my cosmonaut buddies watching their country being bombed, you know. And another political thing was we were flying over. You always hear there's no borders in space. Astronauts just want to hold hands and sing Kumbaya. But one border that really stands out is North Korea, South Korea. There's a picture in View from Above. And I remember flying over one night. I spent a year of my life flying up and down the border in South Korea, flying F-16s there. And I remember thinking, this is politics go wrong. It struck me that I was watching politics from space, because you could see this thriving South Korea, you know, Seoul, lots of lights at night, this beautiful, amazing, modern country. And then you could see just a black hole disaster of North Korea with a little white dot where Pyongyang was. And I never expected to see politics from space, but you actually could, which is why, you know, of all the things there are to do on earth, I think trying to get this right, trying to get democracy right is our biggest problem. Like, I know climate change is a big deal, but if we don't get our politics right, we're not going to get climate change right. I know working together and inequality and the problems with race is important, but if we don't get our politics right, we're never going to get that right. So that's why when you gave that lecture at Harvard, you and Michael Porter, but you were kind of the main speaker there at HBS, and it was so great. And I don't like to give doom and gloom talks. I like to have hope, and you had that, which is what I really liked.
Yeah, thank you. And so again, that's why I'm glad to be here to talk to you about that. I do find that almost everybody who is in this work comes to it because they first cared about a policy, which is they are concerned about our national security, or they're concerned about immigration, they're concerned about inequality, or concerned about climate, or concerned about the debt, which is part of what brought me to the issue years ago. And then everybody comes to the conclusion at some point that even though they didn't intend to get into politics, they wanted to stay at policy, that when the political system is incapable of dealing with these trade-offs, and when there's no accountability in the political system, that there's no path, from here to there,
right,
that we're going to follow. So yes, that's now my full-time career. I actually sometimes say I can't wait, Terry, until I can care about policy again. Right now, I put my policy views aside to think in this nonpartisan way about a system and what it would take for it to function.
That's really interesting, because at HBS, they're very careful to not be partisan, and they've got students from every country on earth. So they try, you walk a fine line in a university setting. And once you become pro-Trump, or once you become anti-Trump, half the country is not going to listen to you. So you have to walk that line and kind of be agnostic if you want to make changes to our political system, Yeah.
And also I started doing this work all the way back in 2013. So that was when it was already, clear, abundantly clear, that our political system wasn't helping us solve problems out of Washington, D.C. And that predates any particular political leader. It certainly predates Trump's emergence in his presidential campaign, and also any of the response, to Trump and the current divides that we have, which is to say, this existed before, this exists now, and it's going to continue to exist unless we change the system. So what I'm about is bigger than any policy, and also bigger than any individual politician.
What I think Einstein said, continuing to do the same thing and expecting a different result is the definition of insanity. So either we change things, or I think things go very badly. Do you think, in my mind, this is kind of a test of democracy? This is democracy versus authoritarianism. Does it make sense to let people choose their course, or does it make sense to have the Chinese Communist Party determine everything for individuals? Do you see that as what's going on now? Is this a test of democracy on earth?
I do. So here's what I think. I think that America, has this extraordinary constitution, and we have not always lived up to that, not right from the start, and not always every day. But the Constitution has, with amendments, stood the test of time, and it is very strong. And it's created this, this republic that we own. But we have taken for granted that the Constitution was enough to make this republic, our democracy, work. And in fact, the Constitution is, it fits in the pocket. I used to have one over here. I don't have one at hand now. I mean, it's tiny. It fits in a pocket. That's why we call it pocket Constitution. And the fact is, we have 3,000 pages of a rule book in the Senate and 3,000 pages of a rule book in the House. And then we have election rules that are different in every state across the country, which is to say there are norms and rules and practices of how the democracy works day to day that can either help the democracy deliver on the promise of the Constitution, or can actually kind of screw it up. So one of the things I talk to people about a lot is, this is like the way we run our elections turns out to be a really bad regulation. It's like we have these ideals in the Constitution, and that includes that we have to elect people to represent us. But the way we have decided to do that is really turning out to be a huge problem. The problem isn't in the Constitution, and it isn't even inherently in the politicians or in the policies. It's in this system piece. And I could, sort of tell you what the insanity is that we're currently engaged in, to go back to your Einstein quote.
Yeah. Well, so let's talk about that. And I want to talk, let's kind of walk through, how we got here, what's happening now, and how we can fix it. So how we got here. And I realized this a few decades ago. I went, when I was a kid, everybody watched Walter Cronkite, and you read the Washington Post or New York Times or whatever. We all got our news from the same source. There were liberals, there was conservatives, there was lots of different people, but at least they had a common reference frame, right? And now that's not true anymore. Everybody gets their own news. I talk to people about normal things that I think are completely, everybody should know, and they've never heard of them before, because we're in this echo chamber. So can you talk about that? Do you see that as being one of the causal factors of this mess we're in?
I think that any, problem or situation we would find ourselves in is rarely the result of a single cause.
Right.
And so there's no question that the division that we have and again, the inability of Congress to work in a bipartisan way to find consensus is absolutely negatively influenced by the fact that we don't have an agreement on what we're paying attention to, and we don't have a general agreement on at least the core facts of many situations, that even the facts can be seen so differently from sides. That's a problem. I actually don't focus very much on that problem, because the things I want to focus on are the problems where we as people could have a lever to pull that we could change them. So I'm a business person, and I have to deliver specific results my entire career, and I could talk a lot about what's wrong, but I don't have a solution to change it. I can't make it go back to the Walter Cronkite days. And I'm also not saying that was exactly perfect anyway, but so I searched within all the causes of our current situation for something that was powerful enough to change the situation we're in, but also something that we could achieve. I didn't want to say to people, oh, listen, if this were different, everything would be okay. And then someone said, okay, great, let's make it different. I say, oh yeah, we can't do it.
That's impossible, right?
And that's kind of what I think about changing the media in some substantive enough way, to make a difference. We don't have a lever to do that, and we wouldn't agree on what needed to be done.
Right. So I like that. We are where we are. There's, if you saw The Social Dilemma, it's a great documentary. I think we need to fix some of that stuff, because that's what led to a lot, January 6th happened because of this. But in the big picture.
But let me say one other thing. The fact there are chicken and eggs things.
Right.
Okay. So yes, what happens and is covered in totally different ways by, let's just say, the left media and the right media and people's echo chambers. I think the best way to fix that is to go back to, at least for politics, is to go back to the root of what is being covered and have it not be so advantageous to each side right now to have the country hate the other side. So, I mean, the media can report on things in part because the people they're reporting on are in certain cases helped by the way the media is reporting on it. So if it was less advantageous for the left, for the right to be perceived as evil, and less advantageous for the right, for the left to be perceived as evil, then they wouldn't be sort of contributing into that echo chamber in the way they do now.
So let me ask, this is a good question. I have my thoughts, but I don't know what you think. You know what a bell curve is, right? Most everything groups in the middle. There's only a few people on the extreme right and extreme left. And that's true for your height. That's true for your weight. That's true for how many years you live. And I think it's true for politics. But right now, if you look at Washington, there's a big bar on the right and a big bar on the left and very little in the middle. But do you think that people, given some type of normal situation politically, are a bell curve? Or do you think we're this kind of crazy right and crazy left?
The first thing I think is that there actually, in the real world, is not just one dimension of how people would think if they had like the full range of expression available to them. Okay?
Right. There's social and fiscal and military and everything. Yeah.
Exactly. But in the current left-right, I think that there are a lot more people who are in different places along the curve than what we see represented in media and what we see in Congress. Now, I don't know exactly how bell curve it is, because I think it's a different bell for each of those issues, like national security or social issues or fiscal issues, et cetera. I think it's more complex than that. But here's one thing I'll say really specifically. I think it's very valuable in a diverse and democratic country to have views all along the spectrum, this spectrum, that spectrum, here, there, and everywhere. Our challenge is not to say, how could we all come to agree to this exact same thing? Our challenge is, given that diversity of opinion, and also given that our problems are complex, there isn't only one way to solve them.
Right.
And that any way to solve them will have certain trade-offs. Our question is, how do we find a Congress that can function and manage these complexities even when there is this diversity of opinion? So it's not let's make everybody agree, it's let's figure out how to work together even when we don't agree, and even when there isn't only one right way. And that is baked into the system right now, that we can't do that. So I'll specifically respond now. This is the right that we see, and this is the left that we see, and I have to take them out of the screen because they're so far apart from each other, which is what you were referring to. And the reason they're so far apart from each other is because in this country, we have party primaries. So there's a Republican primary over here and a Democrat primary over here. And when we go to elect people for Congress, and people who vote in party primaries are more politically extreme than people who vote in general elections. And in over 80% of elections to the US House, for example, the primary is the only election that matters. Whoever wins the red primary in the Republican district is automatically guaranteed to win the general. And so, and I know you know this, but I still think voters are missing this sometimes. And so what happens then is that 10% of people who vote in this determinative primary are the boss of the behavior that we see in Congress. So
the majority of Congress,
Yeah, they look, everybody is rational, and there are many talented people in Congress, but they have to be concerned with solving problems, but they also have to be concerned with continuing to keep their jobs, or they can't be there to solve problems. So, it's easy for us to be all high and mighty, but let's be realistic. In our jobs, we care about what it takes to succeed and to grow and to keep our jobs. And what it takes to keep a job, if you are a Democrat in Congress right now, is to look over your left shoulder and say, am I going to be primaried? Someone's going to run against me in my Democrat primary and take me out. And that means they're going to run further to my left. They're going to say, you're too far to the center. So you have to act out here. And in the Republican side, it's the same. You can't do things in the center, even if that's what your general electorate wants and your whole constituency wants, because you could lose your primary.
Talk about gerrymandering, because I think that drives a lot of the problem that you're talking about. Can you describe what that is and like how we got to this ridiculously gerrymandered situation that we have?
Yeah, exactly. So every 10 years, according to the Constitution, we redraw the districts of each House race, each House district. And that depends on the census. So we're about to redraw them now. And the districts are supposed to, sort of create this geographic area where this is the representative from, the 3rd district of Wisconsin, and they represent the people in that. What has happened, and it actually goes all the way back to our founding, when Elbridge Gerry, who was the governor of Massachusetts, and he had actually signed the Declaration of Independence. That's how long ago this was. He created a district that looked like a salamander. And that's why they call it Gerry, because he was Elbridge Gerry, gerrymandering.
Huh. And
the reason he created this district that looked like a salamander is because he wanted to put certain people in that district that he thought together would vote for the kind of person that he supports. And this is the political tradition now of politicians choosing their voters instead of voters choosing their politicians. So the state legislatures, this is generally how it happens. Every state is a little bit different, but most state legislatures draw the maps in a way that makes it most likely that they will get more districts, more seats that favor their party than that favor the other party. And that's what gerrymandering is. And the districts aren't drawn neutrally.
Right. So this has happened, say, in a Republican state house that has 10 congressional districts. They'll take 2 or 3 districts and make them 90% Democrat. And then the other 7 or 8 districts will be 60% Republican or whatever. So even though the state would probably be 50-50, it'll be 7-3 or something like that. That's how I understand it.
There's actually a terminology, you sort of pack and crack, which is you use all of the data we have on the voters and you pack the other side, the opposition, into as few places as possible. And then you crack, which is you separate, your voters so you can get as many districts with just 60% of your voters. Now, I do want to be clear, and you used an example of a Republican district. Democrats and Republicans over time use this strategy equally.
Right. It's really efficient.
More egregious now because of the data that's available, which is they don't have to guess how to draw the district. It's more scientific, but it has been a political tool of both sides. And those that cry out against it are usually crying out against it because they're the ones that have sort of lost that political game in their state.
But it works. It's really, really, really efficient. The state that whoever draws the map determines the elections pretty much. And that's not necessarily promoting the will of the people. It's promoting their party getting into power.
Yes, that is true. That it's a very powerful political tool. What I will also say, though, is that there is a natural geographic sorting that does happen, which is some areas are naturally more Republican or naturally more Democratic. And so even if you drew it in a nonpartisan way, it could turn out that some districts are blue and some districts are red. Now, this does not mean that I defend gerrymandering. It's horrible. We should not have it. But here's what I'll tell you, and what I like is that we don't have to fight about that because there's something better and more, there's something more powerful that we can do that sort of leapfrogs over the problems that gerrymandering or natural sorting have created and takes away and mitigates the damage of that. Here's what I'm saying. Right now, the reason why gerrymandering or even naturally sorted districts are a problem is because the important election is in the primary. If the only election that mattered or not the only, if the election that made the final decision were the general election, then the fact that a district is red doesn't mean that Democrats have no say, because if the general election is the election that matters, Democrats have a say in the general election. And so I do, when I said before, I like to do things that would change the outcome and that we can do. So here's the thing about gerrymandering. If you fixed it all on its own and there was some way to have perfectly fair districts, you would still have a lot of elections decided in the primary. And if you still had one Democrat and one Republican, we still couldn't work together. Whereas, and the second thing is it's not super achievable because the Supreme Court has allowed it to stand and because it's a political football right now. Whereas if you just say, okay, it shouldn't be, and someday we'll need to fix it, but let's go to something we can all agree on and let's make the general election the most important, then you really can get past the
Right.
most horrific effects.
Okay. So our structural problems like echo chamber news and gerrymandering, they suck. We should fix them, but we probably can't. But you have a solution to make the general election. I think New York City famously did use this technique this time, and there's been some other places have done this. So can you talk about how do you make, if it's a red district, that's great, but how do you elect a moderate Republican and not a far right Republican? How does that happen?
Yes, so it happens by changing the way we run our elections, and it involves a new system, which I call final five voting, which I'm going to describe in a moment. But let me first say that what I'm about to describe is not what New York City did.
Okay.
And I will make that difference clear at the end. But it's not unusual that there's a confusion that it is what New York City did. So it makes sense that we need to clarify. Here's what we need to do. Final five voting is the umbrella name for a combination of two changes to our election system. First, let's get rid of party primaries, because as I just said, and you agree, these are the things that make the Republicans way over here and the Democrats way over here. And they're the structures that mean that only 10% of voters in this country have an effective voice in politics. So let's just get rid of them. They were only invented 100 years ago. Instead of having a party primary where one Democrat advances, one Republican advances, we'll have a first round election called a primary on the same day. And now when you go to vote in the primary, every candidate running, Democrats, Republicans, Greens, Libertarians, Independents, is all on the same ballot, and all voters vote on that same slate. You don't just have to be registered as a Republican and vote in the Republican primary, for example. You all vote in the same slate. You see all the candidates, you pick your favorite, and the polls close and they count the votes. And now, out of this primary, the top five finishers will automatically advance to the general election. So now we're going to have this benefit of having five visions, five candidacies, five sets of ideas for solving problems and creating opportunities. And you'll have that debate of these five candidates between the primary and the general. This could easily be 3 Republicans and 2 Democrats. It could be, 2 Democrats, an independent, a Green Party, and 1 Republican. It just depends what the voters have selected. But if you have 3 Democrats, it's likely that you have different kinds. You have a libertarian leaning Democrat. You have a quote, establishment Republican. A libertarian leaning Republican, an establishment Republican, a populist, Trump supported Republican. And they're going to debate about which Republican the general electorate wants. So now you go to the general and you're going to have these 5 candidates. Here's where we put in the second piece of our change. What we don't want to do now that we have 5 is have one of these 5 be almost accidentally elected with, let's say, 21% of the vote if the vote splits 5 ways. So here's where we implement what I call instant runoff voting. Not that I made up that name, other people call it that, but it's also known as ranked choice voting. So we implement instant runoff voting. And of course, I know you know this, Terry, but I'll say it for the people who may not. This is how you figure out which of the 5 has the majority support. So when you go into the polls, you say, oh, out of these 5, Terry is my first choice. I really want him to be my senator. But if I can't have Terry, I fill in this bubble and I say, Amy can be my second choice. And if I can't have Terry or Amy, I'll take this person all the way down to my 5th choice, something like over my dead body. Do I want this person to be my senator? When the polls close, now we count everybody's first choice votes. And if one of those 5 candidates has a true majority over 50%, great, election's over, they won. But if the vote has split and nobody is the clear majority winner, then we begin a series of instant runoffs. The person who came in last place is automatically eliminated. And if you had selected that candidate who's now out of the race as your first choice, now your single vote automatically transfers to one of the remaining 4 candidates who's still in the race. And we continue, and then you count the votes again and look for a majority winner. And if you don't have one, you eliminate another person, and the votes keep getting retabulated until we know which candidate has the broadest appeal to the greatest number of voters. That system together is final 5 voting, top 5 primaries plus instant runoff voting in the general election. And here's why we want to do that. Sometimes final 5 voting will change who wins. A different kind of person might win than one in our existing system. But the most important thing about, but final 5 voting isn't specifically designed so we change who wins. It's designed to change what the winners have the freedom to do and are incented to do, and on whose behalf they're doing it when they're in Congress, which is to say, now someone elected out of this system may go to Congress being very much a liberal Democrat or very much a conservative Republican, but they go there with the ability to be a leader and to work with the other side and to figure out how to manage the trade-offs and solve a complex problem in a consensus way. And they can vote yes to something that doesn't give them everything they want and doesn't give their party primary voters everything they want, because they're now answering to the general election voters, which includes people across the spectrum and including people, let's say not in their party. So they have more freedom to work together, because the one thing the party primary currently says, those party primaries, those voters agree on one thing: don't you dare compromise with the other side.
Right.
The general election voters would, be more okay with a consensus solution. And that's where we need to get, because almost all of our problems are going to require some of this and some of that. And I'm almost done talking, but here's the difference between final 5 voting and what New York recently did. Mm-hmm. So New York City implemented one part of final 5 voting in their elections. They implemented the ranked choice voting part, the instant runoff part, where you rank the candidates, and they put it in party primaries. So the Democrats got to rank their choices for mayor, and they used that, and therefore they selected their candidate for mayor. But and in this case, it didn't seem to change who won, but sometimes it might. But it didn't change what the winners have the freedom to do, which is to say there's still a Democrat primary. Right. So the mayor of New York we already know who it is. It's Eric Adams.
It's a Democratic primary winner, right?
Yeah, and it's 4 months out of the general election, and we know that's so undemocratic, I can barely stand it. And so now, but the problem with that is not that he is or isn't going to be a great mayor. It is that he has to care more about those voters and about everybody in New York City. Right. Because those other voters, all the Republicans and all the independents, never have any say.
Right. And independents rarely have say. So let me, I've got my notebook. I'm taking notes like a good college lecture here. The bottom line is you want to not have party primaries to prevent, that kind of takes the gerrymandering sting. It takes a little bit of the gerrymandering sting out of the whole process. You just have a primary where everybody is in it. So to put this into perspective, in the presidential primary, you would have had Donald Trump and Joe Biden and, the Libertarian guy and the Green Party guy all on when you went in for your primary vote in August or in March or whatever, you would have had them on the ballot. And then the top 5 vote getters from that end up in November. And then you do this instant runoff ranked choice voting system that promotes the person who is liked by most voters, not just the extreme voters. Did I say that about right?
You did, except here's something. Final 5 voting, we're advocating for congressional elections only, meaning the House and the Senate. Okay. There are reasons which won't be totally interesting to everybody right now to go into why each state, well, I'll go into it a little. So the Constitution in Article 1 gives each state the power to determine the rules of elections for Congress, for the House and Senate. It does not give any method where the whole country could change the way that they vote for president. Okay, so we're not talking about changing the election for presidential candidates right now. And I would argue, and there are things we should do there, including using ranked choice voting in the presidential primary system, but I'm not arguing for having just one primary for the president, and we wouldn't be able to get there from here.
Because of the Constitution.
Anyway. Because of how all the states would need to change it at one time.
Right.
So there's something else we need to do, but here's what we get. If we can change how Congress functions, then we're really going to see a big change in what's possible in Washington, D.C. Because of course, the president can only sign the bills that Congress can get on his or her desk. And if I could choose sort of a different kind of president or a different president or a different Congress, I would choose a different Congress. Because that's actually where the legislative power is supposed to be. They're supposed to be the first branch of our government, and that's where the dysfunction is the greatest. And here's the other thing. It's the most achievable.
Right.
Because if we change only 5 states to this new system, we would have 10 senators who have a certain freedom from the tyranny of the party primary.
Right.
From the fact they wouldn't have to always look over their shoulder. They could look forward at the problem.
Right.
And 10 senators would make a big difference. You don't have to do it in every state to start to change what Washington, D.C. is capable of.
Okay. So that, I mean, I think going back, I think this really started in 94, but the congressional deadlock, when you see these graphics going back decades, they have little red dots and blue dots, and the dots used to all be mixed, which meant that sometimes you voted with the other party and there really was negotiation going on. And those dots have come out. I don't know if you have it, but now there's just a red block and a blue block. There's no thing. Is that your book there?
This is my book.
Okay,
and that
excellent.
Is the graphic.
There you go.
Those exact charts of how the red and blue used to be sort of mixed.
Right.
And then now, as you're describing, they're totally separate.
I had a chance to go to Parliament probably 20 years ago in London, and the British politics is the most entertaining thing. CNBC shows that sometimes when the prime minister has to go and the other party yells at him, oh, blah, blah, they just get yelled at constantly, and it's really awesome. And then we went downstairs, and they have like bars, and they're smoking cigars and stuff, and they're all buddies, they're drinking, and it was exactly like you would think. But like the parties were working, that's where the deals got done. They were actually working together. And talking to friends of mine who are in Congress and stuff, that just doesn't happen anymore. There's very few personal friendships and relationships. And so what you're describing, I think it sounds like it could really fix a lot of our problems.
I think here's what I'll say about Final Five voting. If we change the incentives for the best way to get and keep a job in Congress, that's super powerful. It doesn't guarantee that Congress will solve our problems.
Right.
It ends the guarantee that they will not.
I love that.
And that's the situation we're in right now. The party primary system guarantees that they are not allowed to figure out a way forward, because the best way to get elected is to look over your shoulder to the right and the left, and to make the other side seem evil, and to give the other side no wins ever. And so everybody's doing what's totally rational under the rules of the game. Look, if you change the rules of the game for what it takes to win a basketball game, like you say, oh, if you stand on the left side of the court, that's worth 4 points.
Right.
Everybody will change their game to get their players to the left side of the court as much as possible.
Right.
So, and whatever, like right-handed players or left-handed players might have more, sort of value in that game than other people. The rules of the game always affect the way the game is played and the outcome of that game. And the rules of the game in our current election system give us exactly what we're getting. And when we change these rules, we're going to see much more latitude for leadership and innovation
Right.
and collaboration in Congress.
I love that. I love that perspective. It doesn't guarantee things will work, but it stops guaranteeing that things won't work. I love that. What do you think about a third party?
So, I'm so glad you asked that. I talked a lot about how party primaries are one of our biggest structural problems, but there's a second huge structural problem, which is that we don't have competition. We don't have healthy competition in politics. Here's what I mean. Let's go back to my time as a business leader. So I'm running this company. It's in Wisconsin. Yes, we made cheese, and I'm sitting there, how can I sell more cheese? And fundamentally, the answer is I need to make my customers very happy. And that means they need to like my cheese. It needs to be at a good cost point, et cetera. And if my customers aren't happy and I'm, making money, but they're not happy, then a competitor is going to come in and say, here, we have something better. Our cheese tastes better, or it's lower cost, or maybe both. But what we have in politics is we have two competitors, Democrats and Republicans. 90% of the country is, for example, unhappy with Congress. And there's a lot of, wealth and power and everything in this industry, but we never see any new competition coming in. And the reason is because of how we vote, which is that unless we have instant runoff voting in the general election, which we don't now, anytime you have more than two candidates, the third candidate, like a third party or an independent, is always a spoiler. So like in 2016, we had Clinton and Trump, but we also had libertarian candidate Gary Johnson. So sort of a different version of, of the right, okay? And you were told, if you liked libertarian candidate Gary Johnson, oh, it's fine, great, you can like him all you want, but whatever you do, do not vote for him. Right. Even though this is a democracy, don't vote for the guy, because the only thing he's going to do is take votes away from Donald Trump and spoil the election for him and help elect Hillary. And Green Party candidate sort of further to the left than Hillary Clinton, Jill Stein, oh yeah, you can like her, but don't vote for her because she is just going to spoil the election for Hillary Clinton. And so those kind of candidacies never get any traction because those people who say they're going to spoil the election are actually right about that.
Well, look at 92. Ross Perot got Bill Clinton elected, I think.
Yeah, I'm going to make a comment about that in one moment.
Okay.
Let me not forget. So,
sorry. Yeah.
So no, I'm so glad you
Third
said
party,
that. So,
yeah.
So point being, we have to get rid of that penalty for new competition. And instant runoff voting makes sure that if you wanted to vote for Gary Johnson or you wanted to vote for Jill Stein, you would never be spoiling the election for your sort of next choice candidate that's more likely to win. Because if your candidate comes in last place, if Jill Stein comes in last place, your vote gets transferred to Hillary Clinton. If Gary Johnson gets kicked out of the race, your vote can go next to Donald Trump. So you can vote for whoever you want to, and most importantly, those people can get into the race. Now, let me be clear, there actually isn't a problem with having only two parties. And there isn't a problem with, quote, the Democrats or the Republicans. The problem that we have is not that we have only two, it's that the current two are guaranteed to continue to be the only two ongoingly, regardless of what they do or don't get done on behalf of the public. Right. So what you want is not necessarily a certain number of parties, like if we had three, that would be great. No, it's that you want the competitors in this, the Democrats and Republicans, to feel the threat of new competition if they don't start making voters far more happy than they're making voters now. That's what free markets and competition does. That's why we have better and better products in the private sector, because there's competition to serve the customer. And when there's no competition for the Democrats or the Republicans, the only customers they have to worry about serving, and the only customers that it is logical for them to worry about serving, are party primary voters, special interests, and donors. But as soon as you can have more competition, then they can do what most of them want to do anyway, which is solve problems in the general interest, because that will be the best way to keep their jobs. Now, I want to say one other thing about this Perot. So yes, Ross Perot in 1992 is considered to have spoiled the election for George Bush. There's been some analysis by 538, I believe, actually, that says he drew votes equally from both sides. So he may or may not have been a spoiler. But here's the thing. Competition delivers results even when quote, the new competitor doesn't win. Because what Perot did is he ran on this issue that the debt and deficit mattered, and that we were spending too much, and he had all these charts on it. And he got 19% of the vote in November of 92. He got 0 electoral votes, so he lost, but the American public won. Here's why. At the end of the Clinton years, the Democrats and the Republicans worked together to get us balanced budgets and a surplus. Now, there were some economic reasons why they did that, but I'll tell you the reason, a key reason they did it is because they felt competition from people, from Perot and his nascent Reform Party, because if he got 19% when he had no chance of winning, what if he was able to sort of do a better job and they were going to lose their market share to him? So they were both incented by the competition to work together to address that issue. And that's what competition, really does. And that's why we need it in our political system. Because look, I mean, it's, again, not about changing necessarily who wins, but about the winners, what the winners have the freedom to do and are incented to do. And if 19% of the public cared a lot about that, then people should take care of it. And I'll say, Paul Begala was one of Clinton's advisors. And when Ross Perot died about 2 years ago, Paul said in an op-ed at the time, he said, it is doubtful that we would have solved that issue without the pressure that Perot's voters brought to that.
No, it's true. And the thing that I love, I do think we need a legitimate third party or more parties, but the Republicans and Democrats have an ironclad grip on power and they're not going to give it up. And ranked choice in Final Five enables competition. I love that. Without it, we're stuck. Without it, we're in this infinite insanity loop that we're in right now. And having something like that allows, other competitors to come in. So I had a guy named Chris Mellon on, former Undersecretary of Defense. We were talking about UFOs, but he has some great political ideas too, really smart guy. And one of the ideas he had, what the BRAC is, the Base Realignment Commission.
Did he say UFOs are real? Just quick question.
Well, he's the guy that forced the Pentagon to show these videos of these, the Navy fighter pilot videos. Oh, yeah. He's the guy that got those released. And so they don't call them UFOs anymore. They're UAPs. But for sure, there are absolutely unexplained aerial phenomenon. Where they came from, that's the question. But for sure, there's these things that we've seen that are weird. But
on my to-do list to listen to that. But sorry, back to
so I've got Chris, I've got Lou Elizondo, and I just had Paul Hynek on, so you have to check those out. But we were talking about politics, and he, I think, has a very similar concern that you and I do. And in the military, we have this thing called a BRAC. We used to do them about every 10 years. It's a bipartisan commission that comes in and shuts down military bases. And over the last 40 or 50 years, we've probably shut down 2/3 of our military bases. And without that authority to make important decisions, no congressman's ever going to let their base get shut down. And we would just be wasting taxpayer money. We waste plenty of taxpayer money as it is. And so his thought was to use a BRAC type of system to ungerrymander our congressional districts. Have you thought of that? Having some type of, give these guys a lot of authority to save our democracy. Have you ever thought of that?
I would not so much say that I have thought of that, but I think that's relatively akin to the nonpartisan commissions that different states are setting up to try to not have political gerrymandering. Right. That's what I'm for, which is to say, if I could vote yes to have a nonpartisan commission like these BRAC commissions who will do this in a non-political way, I would do it. I'll go back to saying that it's not super achievable because each state would have to change that on their own. And
Right.
the people in the state who would have the power to change that are usually the ones who are benefiting from the current, system.
Status quo, yeah.
Yeah. And now, I mean, a lot of states could run ballot initiatives on it, and they have, and I, again, applaud those, but I would also say that you have to run a ballot initiative to get Final Five voting in. And if you can only run so many ballot initiatives and get people motivated, and there's only
Right.
so much money to be spent, everybody would get more bang for their buck by supporting a ballot initiative on Final Five voting
Right.
than to get rid of gerrymandering if you still leave party primaries and, and just plurality voting, just vote for
Right.
one in the general election intact.
Okay.
So it's prioritization.
Right.
It's just a priority.
Right. I had Michael Steele on here a few weeks ago, the former RNC chairman,
Yeah.
and he's great. We're both from Maryland, and he was really good. But we talked about these issues too. Another thing,
I think he supports Final Five voting. Did he give you that sense?
He did. I forgot the name of I have to look through my notes. He's doing something like you. Like his focus now is on trying to solve how we're doing our voting. I should put you two in touch. He's working with an organization trying to fix democracy. So that might be a good connection. So I want to talk about how we have our Senate and how we do our electoral college votes, right? Each state gets 2 senators. And I've seen numbers, something like 30 or 40% more people are represented by the 50 Democrat senators than are represented by the 50 Republican senators. And that is because Wyoming and South Dakota and Alaska and Montana, there's a lot more red small states, and California, New York, and a couple other states are where half the country lives, and everybody gets 2 senators. And the electoral college is also, I think it's the number of congressmen plus your 2 senators. So again, that really, really strongly advantages small states. Your vote is worth something like 1.3 votes if you live in Wyoming, and then it's worth 0.7 votes if you live in California. Plus, California is going to be Democrat, so your vote really is meaningless there. So
for the presidency.
For the presidency, right. And so can you talk through that issue of how we do our electoral college, how we do the Senate? That's a huge issue. I know I threw you a whole nother topic, but thoughts on that?
I don't want to sound like a broken record, but I think I will here, which is to say, I think what listeners here or voters or, citizens in general would most like to hear are ideas that could change how Congress works that we can achieve.
Right.
So I am all about prioritization. Okay. I don't want to do something to win if it makes no difference. And I don't want to say something could make a big difference if we can't win.
Right.
When I look at the electoral college, then I just, or the fact that, there's 2 senators per state, et cetera. I don't even spend time debating which would be a good idea, how we should change these things, because we're not going to change them in my lifetime.
Popular vote compact.
I'll talk about that in a moment.
Okay.
So, and the reason is because the electoral college and 2 senators per state are in the Constitution. So we'd have to get a constitutional amendment to do that. And that's not feasible right now, because you have to get so many of the states to agree to it that are benefited by the current system. So we can have a lot of debates, and we can form organizations, and we can show why X would be better or Y would be. And, even if even if a lot of people agreed on it, it's not going to get done. And so I personally wouldn't put my time there. I do think it's good that some people put their time on constitutional amendments, because I hope there's a time when we are capable of agreeing on something that could move us forward. But I want to do something that we can have benefit from in years, not decades. Here's the popular vote compact. So again, just for the listeners, what you're talking about is, since many people want to change the electoral college, and they, in a sense, probably agree with me that we can't do it through a constitutional amendment because that's not going to get passed. Another way to do it would be for states to agree to allocate their electoral votes according to whoever wins the national popular vote. Now, I know Michael Steele is working on this a great deal, and I think, very highly of him and his work. And but I'm going to be real straightforward here. I think that the likelihood that enough states agree to the national popular vote is about the same likelihood that they agree to a constitutional amendment.
Wow.
Because
they're like 1/3 right now or something. They're
right. But you could get really close on a constitutional amendment too. But if you can't get over the mix, and the reason you can't get over the mix is because it's the same states that benefit from the current, system that can't get you there. Now, I might end up being wrong. And I, again, applaud people who work for all these issues that they care about so much. But I would be surprised if they got there. Now, but the second thing I'll tell you is, okay, great. Now we have a popularly elected president. Let's just imagine that we have a popularly elected president. So let's say that it was Hillary Clinton in 2016, and it was perhaps Al Gore back in X,
2000.
Yeah, 2000. Take Congress being exactly how it was. How many people think that we'd be in a substantively different place as a country? I mean, I know some partisans would say, oh, then there would have been this Democratic trifecta, et cetera, but you have a not productive Congress over time. That's not going to get us where we need to go. Congress is the key.
In America, we normally elect a Congress that's the opposite party of the president a lot of times in the midterm, and then you end up with gridlock immediately because of all the problems you've been talking about. So I still think it's something that should be done, but if it can't be done, then why waste your time?
Well, then again, here's the thing, just because things should be done doesn't mean that, just because if they were successful, it would be helpful, doesn't mean that they should be our top priority.
Right.
Okay. So there are many things that would be helpful, but we can't get lots of different changes implemented. So I just want to be the one that makes the case to say, let's get critical mass of focus on Final Five voting, because we can do it and it would be powerful, and it's like at the sweet spot of powerful and achievable. So let's make that happen. And then as soon as we make that happen, we're not done. It's not like the silver bullet and now everything is perfect. Then people can move on to sort of the next thing that becomes achievable or becomes powerful after you've gotten rid of basically the just enormous problem that no competition and party primaries are in our current system.
Right. No, that does seem like the most useful thing. Although back to the popular vote compact, the presidential elections we have now, presidents don't care about California, New York, and Texas. They care about fracking in Pennsylvania and corn in Iowa. It's such a narrow number of states that really matter. It would kind of have the same effect that you're talking about for Congress, and that then the presidents would have to care about the general population and not just a few handpicked states. So anyway, but it's
right. But Congress doesn't give them any better bills
if you don't have the right Congress, right? If you had to pick one or the other, I get it. But what I'm saying is let's do both. But
I would. I mean, that's really interesting. That is a question. Mm-hmm. Now, my co-author, Michael Porter, on this politics stuff, his fame and his work over his lifetime has been on strategy. He's the father of modern corporate strategy. And one of his most favorite quotes, and my personal favorite of his work, is that strategy is about choosing what not to do. And what he means by that is if you have too many things on your plate, you won't do any of them well enough to differentiate yourself or get them over the finish line. He means more than that, but so again, I don't think everybody should work on this issue that I love. No question, people need to work on other issues. I think enough of us need to choose Final Five voting as being our top priority to make it happen. And if there are also then enough people, how do you make it happen? How
do you make Final Five? Do state legislatures?
Okay, super good idea. Well, first of all, it already has happened. It's not just a theory. So Alaska the state of Alaska passed a ballot measure where the citizens vote on the proposal in November of 2020. So Alaska passed what I would call Final Four voting. So my earlier work that I published in 2017 out of Harvard Business School called for the top 4 primaries and then instant runoff voting in general elections. And the man who ran Alaska, Scott Kendall, had read my 2017 work and took it basically from that point all the way across the finish line. We were fortunate to help in whatever way we could, as well as some other great organizations. And so Scott, who now works with me, we are working now on Final Five voting, but my point is to have ballot initiatives like they did in Alaska for Final Five voting. So you're right, it's the states, because the states have the right to make these rules, and you can do it in 2 ways. One, you can run these ballot initiatives and then the citizens will vote, or you can get a piece of legislation through your state legislature and the governor can sign that bill. And so there'll be those 2 methods. I believe my stated goal is that I want to see a minimum of 4 states pass Final Five voting in 2022.
Okay. And then 4 more in 24, and then 8 more, whatever.
Yeah.
It's to get the snowball rolling.
Yeah, there's definitely a momentum play here, which is, look, right now, nobody's really heard of it. I mean, how much do we think, Terry, of your audience, which is an engaged audience, how much percentage of them have heard of Final Five voting until today? Not so many. And that's why I always like to bring up Alaska, which is to say, oh, it's not just this crazy lady's idea. It's a real thing. It's affected all the congressional elections in Alaska, and they actually ran it for their state government as well. So all of their state legislature and their governor is now going to be elected under this system as well.
Awesome.
So what I would say to your viewers is that if they'd like to be engaged, they could start a campaign in their state. They could get involved with an existing campaign. They can go to my website, which is political-innovation.org, and get in touch with them with us if they want to know what's happening in their state or they want to be a part of it. And the other thing is, and this is it's sort of a small thing, at least in the part of an ask, but I think it is one of the most consequential things, which is I have a TED Talk. And if people like this idea, if they watch my TED Talk and then shared it on their social media or with their friends and family, it's really helpful, because we are not going to pass something that nobody's ever heard of. Right. So even if the people that you share it with don't decide to volunteer or donate 50 cents or anything, if they're ready to vote yes when the time comes, then that's what needs to happen. So it's like, you have a great product, but if nobody's heard of your product, they're not going to look for it on the shelf. Right. So I do invite people to look at the TED Talk. It's 17 minutes and takes you through, Final Five voting, sort of from 0 to 60 in that 17 minutes.
I love that. I think I saw Jennifer Lawrence was doing something. Have you seen that? Yeah. Is she promoting Final Five or?
So Jennifer Lawrence is very engaged with an organization called Represent Us. Yes. And Represent Us is a supporter of Final Five voting, as well as many other initiatives. So again, we're like the narrow strategies about choosing what not to do people here at IPI, and we really focus on Final Five voting, but there are many other organizations that support Final Five. I don't know if Jennifer Lawrence has done something specifically on Final Five for Represent Us, but she has done many pretty compelling pieces of video. I won't say that my performance is quite up to Jennifer Lawrence's performance on her videos, but please do watch my TED Talk.
I will definitely watch it. She's got more, she's got editors and hair and makeup producers and stuff. She's got a team behind her. She actually narrated
it's the team then. No, I have a great team too. I should say that quickly. I have a great team too, but maybe not so much on hair and makeup.
Yeah, mine is pretty simple in the morning. I wash my hair and I'm done. The IMAX movie I had a chance to make in space called A Beautiful Planet was narrated by Jennifer Lawrence. So that was pretty cool.
Oh, that is super cool. Yeah. That's fantastic.
It was fun.
Oh,
you have to check it out.
Movies.
Oh man, they're the best. Toni Myers was our director. She kind of was my mentor and got me motivated to be a filmmaker too. And she was awesome. Unfortunately, she passed away from cancer a couple of years ago, but that was her final and I think best movie. So are there countries that you think that get this right or wrong? And we're framing it in the democracy versus authoritarianism context? Are there, how do you, when you look at other countries, what do you think?
Yeah. So I'm not, an expert in comparative politics, but here's what I'll tell you. There are a couple of countries, Ireland and Australia, that show that use instant runoff voting in their elections, and show that ranking your candidate is something that all people can do. It is not too complex. Voters can manage it. I absolutely know that voters in the United States are equally as capable as voters in Ireland or Australia. So
Right.
that's one thing I see when I look elsewhere. But the other thing I will tell you is that there's not a country that we can look to where they have, for example, something like Final Five voting, or even something that is not like Final Five voting that we should take here, because what we can implement in the United States is bounded by what the Constitution, allows for. So many other Western democracies are, for example, parliamentary systems, like what you were talking about when you were in England. So those are fundamentally different systems where, there is not this separation of powers between the executive and the legislative branch. And therefore, what we need to do in the United States, the challenges that we have are certainly somewhat different. And also the way that we've developed our rules of the game over time are so different. So nobody else uses a party primary system like we do. So, so moving to this first round election with the top 5 finishers advancing is really designed to match what our Constitution, the boundaries that our Constitution puts on how we can run things here. And I will tell you, so in the theory of it, when I look out and I think of a United States with these 3 branches of government and with Congress being elected through Final Five voting, or for example, a parliamentary system with other, structures, I really would put the money on our system with a separate executive and legislative branch, as long as the legislative branch has the right incentives to work collaboratively together.
And that's what your system does. It gives them that incentive.
Yep.
Right now, they have the incentive to kind of be far left or far right, and you're trying to give them the incentive to represent the people, not just a small group of the people.
Yeah, but what I'm also trying to do is really empower, like, real intense ideology or not just opinion, but sort of like viewpoints. We actually don't want a squishy middle or split the difference, because as we know from private sector, again, we need innovation. We need policy innovation, actually. And innovation in almost every industry usually arises from, sort of not the squishy middle. It arises from what it is at the time, the fringes, or an outsider perspective. So we don't want to place a value judgment on the middle versus the extremes. What we want to say is we need to have place for a wide amount of views and ideas while maintaining the ability to come together to make some choices about how we can best move forward right now. What I often say to people is, like the civil rights movement did not arise from the squishy middle at the time. It arises from somewhere else, but you can't be held hostage by the somewhere else all the time. You have to have, it's this delicate balance of what's required when you want to have a representative, democracy. You have to represent the people, but that means you have to agree with, other people. And what's the system that could do that the best here in the United States? And I think that Final Five voting as the method by which people get and keep their jobs is the right balance of being able to be passionate about your ideas and vision while still being able to be practical and rational on behalf of your entire district or state.
I love that. Yeah. Some issues you can't be wishy. I always say, there is right and wrong. The civil rights, clearly there was right and wrong. And climate change, if we're wishy-washy, we're not going to solve that. But sometimes if you're making a budget, sometimes compromise does make sense. And I think your system, have you ever read The Wisdom of Crowds?
I haven't read it, but I have, I'm absolutely familiar with it. It's great.
Yes, it is. It's amazing. It starts out by the space shuttle accident, Challenger. And when it blew up in 1986, all the big aerospace contractors stocks dropped. And this is 1986. This is before Robinhood, before Twitter, before,
Mhm.
you had to call EF Hutton to change your stock. And all the space shuttle contractor stocks dropped immediately. And then within, I think it was 15 minutes, it was a really quick time, they all recovered except for Thiokol, and Thiokol had built the solid rocket boosters that were the culprit of the accident. So essentially the stock market solved that accident the day it happened, and it took NASA months before they were able to do it. And the point is, if you have a crowd that's well informed, that knows what's going on, the group can make a good decision. And you bring that back to democracy. If you let democracy work properly, which it's not now because of these crazy problems we have, but if it works properly through your system of final five and ranked choice, I think it's going to work a lot better. We'll get a lot more outcomes. We're not going to have all the crazy problems that we have. That's
well, that is certainly the hope. We have super complex problems. If our problems were easy, then even the existing crummy system would solve them.
Right. Exactly.
So the problems won't get easier, but America is the country that should be the one who can solve the tough problems. That is perhaps a definition of what it has been to be American over these last 250 years. It is really, sort of this idea of having the best of what it is to be American. We are the ones who gave the world this, constitutional republic, this democracy in the modern age. And we need to show the world also how to have rules of the game that support the visions and ideals of a constitution, rather than rules of the game that thwart those visions, that vision and those ideals at every turn. And it is incumbent upon us that we're responsible for that. Look, the founders did the Constitution, and people over the ages have amended it as we have come to drive our country closer to those ideals. But today, I believe our most important job is not necessarily to do something in the Constitution. It is to correct these rules of the game that are distorting and really detracting from what is possible in this extraordinary country. I mean, this is our time, our challenge, and we need to deliver it.
Yeah, it's the fourth quarter and we need to step it up. I think humanity's at this fork in the road. Yeah. It's either democracy or it's authoritarianism. And that decision, there's no manifest destiny. We're not guaranteed to win. Unless we step it up, we're not going to win. So I think we need a little heat under our butts to get ourselves moving. I love the way you put that. That was great.
I love how you put it. We are the stewards of this democracy. And I think when you and I were growing up, it really did, at least to me, seem that America had already addressed all the issues, like that the fight for liberty and representative government had been waged and won, and that it was a done deal. The game was over and in our favor. And now it is clear that it's, I'm going to quote, I'm from Wisconsin. I'm going to quote Fighting Bob La Follette, who years ago said, America is not made, but is in the making. There is an unending struggle to make and keep government representative. And that is, that's a struggle we're in. And it's actually a struggle I think we should find really motivational and aspirational, because it's, this worthy fight to be in for the country that we love and the country that we want our kids to have.
I love that. We're not made, we're in the making. That is perfect. I love that. So, and we
are the makers,
right?
Not those people who wrote the Constitution, not those people who run Washington, D.C. We, the citizens, are the makers.
we are they.
Yeah.
I hate it when people go, oh, the government's going to do this or the, whatever. And it's like, no, that's you, right? You pay taxes, you vote, that is you. So I love that. So, all right. Political-innovation.org is your
Right.
website.
And my TED Talk is right on there. It must be on the front page.
Katherine Gehl, Gehl.
Yes.
You must have to spell that all the time. No one ever spells Terry Virts, right?
Right. Yeah, exactly.
So Katherine Gehl, Gehl. And what's the name of your book again?
The name of the book is called The Politics Industry:
Okay.
How Political Innovation Can Break Partisan Gridlock and Save Our Democracy.
Excellent. Well, these topics are so important. And normally I'm talking about space and other things, but like I said, unless we get the political science right, the rocket science doesn't matter. That's what I always tell we used to have to go to the Hill and talk to senators and congressmen about policy. And that was kind of my message for them. Unless you get the political science right, the rocket science and whatever else doesn't matter. We got to get this right.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Terry. I love it. I'm going to quote you on that.
Thanks, Kara. Actually, I got quoted in Congress. I remember I had this meeting with a senator, and like the next day he was at a congressional hearing, and he quoted me. So anyway, it's true.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, thanks again, Katherine. And again, if you love Down to Earth, the podcast, please subscribe and do some ratings. And thanks for coming on board.
Thanks, Terry. Have a wonderful day.
You too.